Before listening to this audiobook, please subscribe to my channel for more knowledge. Thank you and enjoy the video. The effects of pornography on adolescent development. A seminar paper presented to the Graduate Faculty University of Wisconsin-Platteville. In partial fulfillment of the requirement for the degree Masters of Science in Education Adult Education. The issue in this research paper was to determine if and how exposure to pornography has any effect on younger and older adolescents. Because adolescence is one of the pivotal developmental times for young people, it is pertinent to learn the facts behind this issue. Additionally, the issue was to learn if pornography affects all adolescents in the same way, or if there are differences between male and female adolescents in their usage and reactions to this exposure. A brief review of literature on the process and importance of adolescent development was conducted. A second review of literature relative to research, studies, and anecdotal evidence of adolescent exposure to pornography was conducted as well. Through the review of literature, it is apparent that adolescents are affected by exposure to pornography, but that the effects vary by age, sex, frequency of exposure and inherent personality of the adolescent. Table of Contents. Chapter 1. Introduction. Introduction. Statement of the problem. Definitions of terms. Delimitations. Method of approach. Chapter 2. Review of literature. Defining pornography. Stages of adolescent development. Adolescence, pornography and technology. Males versus females. Differences in usage and effect. Positive or harmful effects. Chapter 3. Conclusions and recommendations. Chapter 1. Introduction. Pornography has become very prevalent in our culture, and it is readily available to everyone, especially on the internet. It is potentially worrisome that younger and older adolescents can be exposed so easily to very explicit pornography. This exposure may be accidental in the form of adolescents just surfing the internet, or it may be quite intentional. In either case, the question is, does it do harm to the psychological development of the adolescent? Statement of the problem. What does exposure to pornography at a young age do to the psychological development of children? Adolescence is a vital time for emotional and social development in children. It is at this time that the sexual identity of an individual is developed. One would assume that exposure to explicit pornography before children are able to process it cannot be helpful at such a critical developmental stage. Additionally, do adolescents exposed to pornography become hypersexualized and desensitized? How do adolescents who have been exposed to pornography view relationships with the opposite sex after viewing such material? Does the viewing of pornography lead to a higher incidence of rape or other sexual offenses? These are issues that will be addressed by the following literature review. Definition of terms. Pornography, for the purpose of this paper, will be broadly defined as any sexually explicit material created principally for the purpose of inciting sexual arousal or providing erotic pleasure. Diamond, 1999. Obscenity. According to the United States Supreme Court, for something to be obscene, it must be shown that the average person, applying contemporary community standards and viewing the material as a whole, would find, 1. That the work appeals predominantly to prurient, sick, morbid, shameful, or lascivious interest, 2. That it depicts or describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, and 3. That it lacks serious literary, artistic, political or scientific value. Federal Communications Commission, ND. Adolescence. This definition varies slightly depending upon the source, but for purposes of this paper the definition of adolescence will be as follows. A period in time when children ages 12 through 18 years old are expected to undergo dramatic physical, mental and emotional changes, which will be noted by predictable physical and mental milestones. Adolescent Development Overview, 2009. Delimitations of research. The research was conducted through the University of Wisconsin-Rock County, Janesville, Wisconsin, and Carmen Libraries, University of Wisconsin-Platteville, over a period of 90 days. Primary searches were conducted via internet through EBSCO-host, Wilson Web and Academic Search Elite. Key search topics included pornography and adolescence, adolescent development, effects of pornography on adolescents, and psychosexual behavior. Method of approach. A review of literature related to the stages of adolescent development was conducted. A second review of literature was conducted relating to research, studies, and anecdotal evidence of the effects of pornography on adolescent psychological development. The findings were summarized and recommendations made. Chapter 2. Review of related literature. Defining pornography. The word pornography gets its literal meaning from the Greek words porn, meaning whore, and graphein, meaning to write. Malamuth, 1999. Thus, in the past, the term pornography literally meant writing of the whores, while today the term takes on many different forms. Pornography, in modern terms, can be defined as any form of material that is created to sexually arouse or provide sexual pleasure. Diamond, 1999. Even though there is a technical, working definition for the word pornography, it can still be difficult to define in the modern age, due to the wide variety of technology that is employed by the producers of pornography, as well as the wide spectrum of moral views held by society. For example, there is now a debate as to whether or not the viewing of virtual sex, sex with a virtual person, or sex between two virtual people, would be considered pornography, since it does not include real humans, only computer-generated people who often look very real. Before the arrival of the internet, it was more difficult for anyone, adolescents in particular, to access pornographic material, as it had to be bought in a store, magazines and books, or rented in a video store, both of which would require an adolescent to interact with an adult and would likely result in them being denied access to the material. In any case, it seems that the computer age has brought with it much greater access to pornographic material, as indicated by the following statistics. On a daily basis, up to 25% or 68 million of all internet search engine requests are for pornography. Markey and Markey, 2010, and according to the Internet Traffic Measuring Service ComScore, 70% of 18 to 24-year-old men visit adult sites each month. Kendall, 2007. While internet access to pornography seems to be the most prevalent, there are still other ways to access pornography. According to research done in 2005 by Kagan Research, satellite and cable operators earn just under $800 million a year from adult movie subscriptions and pay-per-view orders, which is roughly 40% of pay TV on-demand revenue. Pornography Statistics, 2009. Pornography can be categorized into two main groups, softcore and hardcore or XXX. Diamond, 1999. Softcore pornography is described as the illusion of sexual activity or the simulation of sexual acts without the explicit display of the participant's genitalia. Many magazines of a sexual nature, such as Playboy, Playgirl and Hustler, would be considered softcore pornography. Hardcore pornography, on the other hand, is described as showing sexual acts that are extremely graphic or explicit. The images usually show aroused genitalia and penetration. There are many cable channels, magazines, movies and websites that are dedicated to a variety of hardcore pornography. While pornography can take many forms, most adults would agree that pornography encompasses striptease, live sex acts, hardcore videos, sexual aids and devices, explicit telephone and computer messages, adult magazines, raunchy fiction and more. Slade, 2000. Although much of the pornography that is produced is considered legal for adults over the age of 18, there are some forms of pornography that are illegal. Pornography that displays children under the age of 18, or child pornography as it is more commonly known, is the most prevalent form of illegal pornography. One of the main problems with the legality of pornography is that what may be judged obscene in one state or region may be considered more acceptable in another. According to Finkelher and Ormrod 2004, there are a multitude of factors that may affect the prosecution rates on illegal pornography between states. Some of the factors recognized by Finkelher and Ormrod 2004 were the difference in state statutes, community standards, availability of pornography, and initiatives undertaken by police and prosecutors. However, pornography to an adolescent might be a very different matter. For an adolescent, catching a glimpse of someone's underwear, looking at a lingerie catalog, seeing bare breasts in National Geographic or catching someone in a passionate embrace might all be categorized as pornography. In any case, pornography is a reality, and it is readily available to those who seek it. Many staunch defenders of pornography believe that it is a matter of free speech and First Amendment rights that make it an important medium, saying that limiting the availability of pornography would be outright censorship. Opponents of pornography, including feminists such as Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon, believe that pornography is material that is without merit and just plain obscene, adding to the so-called moral decline of our society. Feminist groups such as Women Against Rape, War, and Women Against Pornography, WAP, are strong lobbyists against the production and availability of pornography. Diamond, 1999. While pornography is believed by many to be a perfectly acceptable means of enjoyment or sexual expression for adults, most could probably also agree that pornography is neither healthy nor necessary for adolescents, or is it? Stages of adolescent development. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics 2011, normal adolescents can be divided up into 3 stages. Early, which includes children between the ages of 10 and 14, 12 middle, which includes children between the ages of 15 and 16 and late, which includes children between the ages of 17 and 21. The adolescent stages of development are a time of great growth and change for children. This is the period of time when children determine their personality, their personal morals and values, and their general outlook on life. A child's sexual identity is also being established at this time, and it is normal for the adolescent to want to experiment sexually. Normal sexual experimentation may include sexual activity with others of the opposite sex, the same sex, and even through masturbation. It is natural for adolescents to be curious about sex and therefore quite natural for children to seek out pornographic material at some point during their adolescence. It is at this point in a child's development that the vast majority of schools in the United States now offer some form of sex education in schools. While the content may vary to include a mix of learning about abstinence, birth control, and HIV prevention, it seems clear to parents that the need for sex education exists. In fact, a poll of 1,000 United States parents conducted by the Kaiser Family Foundation, as referenced in Daylard 2001, indicates that 81% of parents polled wanted sex education taught in the schools. Adolescence is an opportune time for parents as well as educators to begin teaching their children about healthy sexual practices. Unfortunately for adolescents, this time period is also one where actions and consequences are not easily recognized. Children's brains are still developing during the adolescence phase, with the prefrontal cortex not reaching maturity until the approximate age of 25. The prefrontal cortex is primarily responsible for the executive processes in the brain, meaning that this part of the brain controls cognitive analysis and abstract thought, and the moderation of correct behavior in social situations. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Public Health and Science, 2008. An underdeveloped frontal cortex can mean that children have issues with controlling their intense emotions, seeing cause and effect relationships, knowing how to act appropriately in social situations, and other cognitive functions. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Public Health and Science, 2008. Hence, there may be negative effects of exposure to pornography that adolescents cannot see at the moment. Adolescence is a critical time in development. Several biological and psychosocial developmental tasks are completed during adolescence, namely sexual maturation of the body, the development of one's sexual identity, and learning how to deal with physical and emotional intimacy in relationships with others. Delamater and Friedrich, 2002. Additionally, the adolescent will typically determine their gender role in society, as well as their identity as either heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual in the adolescence phase. It is also at this time that adolescents usually begin experimenting with sexual encounters between members of the same sex and the opposite sex. Self-exploration in the form of masturbation is also quite normal at this time, with males typically beginning at 13 to 15 years of age and females beginning at a later age. Delamater and Friedrich, 2002. Adolescence, pornography and technology. One consideration when studying the effects of exposure to pornography on adolescents is the ease with which children can now gain access to this material. Just as far back as 20 years, children may have been able to sneak peeks at pornographic material if a friend was able to obtain a copy of a girly magazine or a parent or older sibling possessed some type of pornographic reading material, but it was not available at the click of a button. In 2010, however, pornography can be easily accessed by anyone with a computer, a television or a cell phone. The website Biomedicine recently reported on a survey that included 429 students aged 13 to 14 from across Alberta, Canada. This survey, conducted by Sonia Thompson, a former sex education teacher, indicated that a majority of the students, 74%, reported viewing pornography on the internet. 41% saw it on video or DVD, and 57% reported seeing it on a specialty TV channel. Thompson, 2007. And according to a recent report in the journal Pediatrics, 42% of adolescents, ages 10 to 17, have viewed internet porn. Castleman, 2009. Males versus females. Differences in pornography consumption and effect. Children from 12 to 19 years of age have been the focus of most studies of adolescent exposure to sexually explicit material. It appears from the literature review that it is widely known that more male adolescents than female adolescents view pornography at both a greater rate and at an earlier age. Older male adolescents, who were computer savvy and who spent 5 or more hours a day on the internet, were most likely to actively seek out pornographic websites. Ibarra and Mitchell, 2005. And in a recent survey by Thompson, 2007, of 429 Canadian adolescents aged 13 to 14, a vast majority of both male and female students reported having viewed explicit pornography at least once, with 33% of the males reporting very high usage, compared to 8% of females surveyed. In a study by Walmer and Wellen. As cited in Bryant, 2009. Both solitary and group use of pornography was more commonly reported by young men for purposes of masturbation than by young females for purposes of sexual socialization. Positive or harmful effects. According to one study. Hagstrom, Norden, Sandberg, Hansen and Tiden, 2006. With a sample of 18-year-old high school students in Sweden, it was determined that males consumed pornography at a higher rate than girls and were more likely to experiment with different sexual practices, such as anal intercourse or group sex. Such practices could potentially be deadly for young men at this age, when the relationship between action and consequence is not easily seen. Unfortunately, it is all too easy for adolescents to contract sexually transmitted diseases before they realize how it happened. Such research in the United States has also yielded troubling conclusions. One researcher, Zillman, as cited in Hogstrom Norton 2006, states that adolescents who view an exorbitant amount of pornography tend to have more contemptuous attitudes about love and sexual pleasure, with little or no warmth towards partners. Conversely, there are a number of studies that have reached other findings regarding adolescent exposure to pornography. In a recent article titled Teens and Porn, Lesenhep 2009 relays the findings of Malamud, a professor of communication and psychology at the University of California, Los Angeles. According to Malamud, there are a number of aspects that can result in a sexually maladjusted person. Negative factors such as a personality disorder, misogynistic feelings, or violence in the home can all predispose an adolescent to sexual maladjustment. So, the argument can be made that not all adolescents are affected in the same way by exposure to pornography. A great deal of how an adolescent reacts to exposure can be traced back to family life and personality traits. It seems that if an adolescent is predisposed to committing violent acts, including violent sexual acts, then exposure to pornography can increase the likelihood of those acts actually coming to fruition. But it is not likely to be the root cause of the violence. Lesenhep, 2009. The tendency toward sexual violence committed by adolescents may also be related to the frequency of exposure to sexually oriented or violent media. Researchers from as far back as the early 1980s have been studying the possible correlation between sexually violent media and acts of sexual violence against women. In a 1982 study conducted by Neil Malamud and his research partner Edward Donnerstein, it is further suggested that there is a link between the exposure to sexually violent pornography and a predisposition to sexual aggression. Malamud and Donnerstein voiced the concern about a possible conditioning effect that links violence and sex on those that frequently view violent pornography. Malamud and Donnerstein theorize that there could be a greater tendency for learned sexual aggression and lowered inhibition of rape for men that are predisposed to sexual violence towards women, but are clear to point out that this is not likely to happen in general. Malamud and Donnerstein, 1982. Dr. Douglas Kirby, a senior research scientist at ETR Associates, a leading publisher of patient education, health promotion and health education pamphlets, who has studied adolescent sexual risk behavior for more than 30 years, believes that there is no correlation between pornography consumption and a greater rate of sexual activity and risk-taking. Kirby, as cited in Lesenhep 2009, states that it is not the case that all the changes that have taken place in society, including much greater access to pornography, have led to an increase in sexual behavior, he says. Between the 90s and the early 2000s, the percent of young people who have ever had sex did not increase. Lesenhep, 2009. There seems to be a correlation between the increased use of pornography on the internet and a decrease in the incidence of rape. According to Anthony D'Amato, professor of law at Northwestern School of Law, there has been a significant decrease in the incidence of rape from 1980 to 2004. In 1980 there were 2.7 rapes for every 1,000 people. In 2004 that number had dropped to 0.4 rapes for every 1,000 people. D'Amato, 2006. In fact, in 1970, D'Amato served as a consultant to President Nixon's Commission on Obscenity and Pornography, which ultimately concluded that there was no contributory relationship between exposure to sexually explicit materials and delinquent or criminal behavior. Summary. There is still much debate as to whether or not pornography negatively affects adolescents. Research is difficult to conduct in this area due to the fact that there are ethical boundaries to consider when working with adolescents. However, researchers have conducted numerous studies and surveys of adolescents and have to come to divergent conclusions. One group of researchers is inclined to believe that adolescents must be predisposed to sexual maladjustment in order for pornography to negatively affect them. Another group of researchers came to quite the opposite conclusion, believing that indeed, pornography may serve an important purpose in that it can teach adolescents about sexual relations. Clearly there is no agreement as to whether or not adolescent exposure to pornography is really detrimental to adolescent development or not. It may simply be such an individual reaction by each youth that no generalization can be made. Chapter 3. Conclusions and Recommendations. It seems that every day our society continues to advance technologically, and it does not appear that there will be any slowing of that growth in the near future. This also means that there will continue to be an abundance of ways for adolescents to access pornographic material, whether via the internet, cell phones or the television. Children in the 21st century are frequently bombarded with sexual images and can easily access graphic sexual material. It is imperative that parents begin discussing healthy sexuality with children at an early age. To combat the views of sexuality and relationships that adolescents may be exposed to in pornography, parents and educators will have to take the time to explain what is real and not real in terms of relationships and healthy sexual expressions. This may mean that adolescents are going to grow up faster than they did 20 years ago. But then they are going to need to be armed with the truth about sexuality versus what they learn through pornography. Perhaps the ready access to pornography in our society will actually encourage more parents to open up the lines of communication with their children regarding issues of sexuality, and it will create a healthier generation than the one before. Parents will continue to play a pivotal role in the development of their adolescent self-esteem and sense of self. Parents can also begin teaching their children about responsibility at an early age by discussing with them the process of decision-making and possible consequences. Teaching adolescents that they can make responsible and informed choices and that they can critically analyze a situation will go a long way in the protection of our children. Even though there is no clear evidence that exposure to pornography will damage the psychological growth of adolescents, it seems implicit that parents should try to limit exposure at an early age, as they would any other controversial and possibly harmful material. There is still much debate as to whether exposure to pornography actually affects each child, but it is likely that more extensive, invasive research in that area will not be done due to the ethical issues that surround intentional exposure to young adolescents. In the event that more research is done, it would be beneficial to see how parental support and openness of communication regarding sexuality might counterbalance any potential negative effects of exposure to pornography on early to middle adolescence.